Phil wakes them up a bit early in the morning, and he's greeted with grumpy faces and Wilbur acting like a sack of potatoes, limp and heavy, and demanding that he get more rest. He seems to enjoy being under Phil's wings, and he keeps trying to stay underneath the feathers, even though Phil keeps moving his wings away. It takes a bit, but Phil's able to drag them onto their feet, then wrangle them to wear some actual shoes. Techno is just disappointed that he doesn't get to go without shoes again. Wilbur is outright offended that he has to have something on his feet. "Would you rather step on something sharp and cut your foot, mate?" Phil asks, tying the laces on Wilbur's shoes as he sits on the bed before Phil. "Yes." Wilbur frowns, and Techno lets out a snort. They leave the inn room, saying goodbye to the nice shelter it provided for the night, and they set off on their way to start travel, with a new goal. The man at the front counter gives Phil a deep frown when they walk past, and Phil responds with a passive-aggressive smile, holding Wilbur and Techno by the hand as they walk out the door. The atmosphere of the town has shifted into something Phil doesn't like, and he holds Wilbur and Techno a bit closer as they stand out in the street, looking around. "So, we're looking for a church?" Wilbur asks, tilting his head as he scans the buildings around him. He tugs at the beanie over his head, making a face, since he's not yet comfortable with it. "A priest, or someone who has, magic." Techno elaborates, looking up at Phil. "Phil?" He asks Phil for the intention of Phil telling them where to walk next, but Phil is more busy with noticing how the people are looking at them. They seem wary, more so than yesterday, and with the hood over Techno's head and the hat on Wilbur's ears, they shouldn't be getting any looks. The image should just be a dad holding his two kids close, but they look at him as if it's something more sinister than that. There's a group of people at the end of the road, and they spot Phil with attentive faces, making their way over in a way they must think is sneaky, but really, it's just outright suspicious. "Boys, let's walk," Phil says, and he pulls them both the opposite way, stepping quickly. "What's happening?" Wilbur asks, glancing behind him, nearly stumbling on his feet. Phil holds him closer, keeping a wing half wrapped around him. "Are there people following us?" "I think word's spread to this town," Phil mutters out, Techno frowning and looking around nervously, the three of them quickly making their way past the buildings. "We need to go. This isn't a good place to search." "Can we fly?" Techno asks. "Fly?" Wilbur repeats, and he looks at Phil's wings, then up at Phil. "What? You can't..." "Well, you can, I guess. You do have wings." "Hey!" someone yells, and Wilbur's words die in his throat. "Sir, hold on!" Phil runs, Wilbur nearly tripping on his feet as he tries to run along. The group of people follow, and when Wilbur sneaks a glance back, he finds that they hold weapons in hand. Hunters. "Phil?" Wilbur runs faster, trying to hold on as tight as he can as they turn the corner, stopping suddenly with more people at the end of the road. Phil, that we're all right," Phil reassures, and he turns again, and finds that they're being surrounded at a crossroads, more people making some sort of circle around them, keeping distance, but staying wary. "That's a lot of people," Techno remarks, and if he had to guess, he would say it's about 30 or so. Only a few of them look like actual hunters, though, with proper armor and weapons. Most of them just look like town citizens who have been dragged into the effort to catch Phil. He thinks that one person actually might be holding up a pan as a weapon. "Oh, He blinks quickly. "They're gonna fight," he breathes out. "I don't want any trouble," Phil calls out, and the people seem to shift around at his words. Wilbur lets go of Phil's hand to hug onto his side instead, and Techno leans in close. They're both mostly hidden away by his wings. Any reason as to why you're all trailing after me and my kids? You know what those are, a woman calls out, holding up an axe. Those things under your wings. Kids. Phil responds, and he smiles thinly. Don't insult my children. We have reports of you harboring 2 monsters that have been hunted down for the past several years. A man yells out, Phil turning his head to look at him. We've lost men, innocent lives, to those monsters. If you want to do the right thing, hand them over. The people look hesitant, scared, and Phil wonders if they're trying to get to Wilbur and Techno without hurting Phil outright. Bargaining first, then force. Phil huffs. Innocent lives. Anyone who's been trying to kill a helpless child as a job isn't innocent. That's not a child! A lady shrieks out, voice shaking. Those are not children! I have children, I have kids, and those are innocent lives. The things hiding under your wings are not. Don't you realize what they will do? To you and to me, to all of us. There's a murmuring agreement that washes through the crowd. Someone takes a careful step forward, a few nodding and getting closer. Don't, Phil warns. The people stop at his tone. Phil. Techno whispers, hand still held tightly onto Phil's, leaning into Phil's side. He sounds panicked. It's all right, Phil reassures, tilting his head down to Techno, who tries to hide even more underneath Phil's wing. There's sudden footsteps, and the crowd's volume jumps up, shouting out words and screaming, and Phil looks to see a brave hunter who's coming right at Phil towards Wilbur's side. Wilbur gasps at seeing the man get closer, and he hears the sound of Phil unsheathing his sword. Phil taking a step forward, and Wilbur moves with him, shoves his face into his shirt and quietly, desperately, hopes it's going to be fine. It'll be fine. Phil's wing shifts tighter around him, and Wilbur blinks his eyes open to realize it's over before it even started. And the crowd has fallen silent in horrified shock. There's a thump behind Wilbur, someone's body falling to the ground. And Wilbur hears a smaller thump right after, and he decides he will not turn around. Phil's sword is wet with blood when he puts it back. Someone screams. Phil? Techno breathes out, and his voice sounds pained. Phil crouches down, picking up the 2 of them off the ground and stretching his wings out into the air for all to see. He takes off from the ground, Wilbur holding on for dear life, and they leave the scene behind, a few people running after with angry yells. Phil ignores them easily, and instead just flies, making as much distance as he can, going up high into the clouds. After a moment, he turns his attention towards Techno, who's tucked his head into Phil's shoulder, his entire posture tense. Tech, Phil whispers. Techno gives a hurt noise in response. Can we spar? He chokes out, Wilbur feeling the wind whip around them, wildly pushing his hair around, and he would be amazed at being up in the sky. But his attention is solely on Techno, who's looking more and more upset by the second. Right now? Phil asks. How bad is it? Can we spar? Techno asks again, tugging at Phil's shirt. Phil suddenly swoops down, Wilbur screaming as they go to land in the trees. Phil hits the ground a bit rough, stumbling and falling to his knees, and Techno tears away from him, running. Techno? Phil yells, Wilbur not being put down, but being carried as he chases after. Technoblade? What's going on? Wilbur asks, screaming again as Techno and Phil both run down a steep hill. Techno disappears into the bushes, and Phil stops right in front of the plants, breathing heavy. "Technoblade, come out," Phil asks. "He's all right, it's just..." Phil says to Wilbur, faltering. "Techno's head gets loud sometimes. I should have expected it with us getting surrounded, but it's fine." "Loud?" Wilbur asks, and Phil kneels down by the bush, hearing the rustling of Technoblade moving around through the leaves. He puts Wilbur down on his feet, leaning towards the bush. "Technoblade?" There's a small, high-pitched squeak, the sound of an animal in pain, and it cuts off suddenly. Phil freezes, before reaching out into the bush and pushing the leaves to the side. Techno's curled up on the dirt, a dead animal in his hands. He stares at it like he's not sure how it got there, and he makes a face at the blood on his hands. "Dad, I think I killed a rabbit," Techno says slowly, seeming calmer, but not entirely all right. He's more grossed out than concerned. "Ew." Wilbur scrunches his nose. Wilbur learns about the voices then, Techno giving a so-so explanation as Phil scrubs his hands clean, putting the dead animal to the side. "It's just, there was a lot of people, and Chat wanted for a big fight to happen, so it started getting worse. Then Phil killed that guy, and they really wanted blood after that." "Phil killed a guy?" Wilbur exclaims. "Did you not see that?" "I wasn't looking." He should have known, though, when he heard that thump behind him. "That's fair." Techno and Phil practice sparring as soon as Techno's hands are clean. Wilbur sits to the side and watches, and he's impressed by just how fast Technoblade can move. Phil's faster, of course, but it's still impressive on Techno's part, because Wilbur is his size, and he would have never expected to hold a sword so deadly like Techno does. Techno lunges and dodges and swings like he's trying to fight something more than just Phil. And Wilbur wonders just exactly how loud the voices in his head can get. He doesn't really understand the idea of chatting in Techno's head. Voices only asking for a fight. But he files it away for future reference. Technoblade is a lot more deadly than Wilbur first thought. And the realization is a lot more comforting than scary. Because all it proves to Wilbur is that Techno will be hard to kill. And that just means it'll be hard to take him away. Chapter 13. But do you know his past? And do you know the tales? They travel for the next 3 days, finding a dirt path and following it. Phil hopes it'll lead to a town that hasn't yet heard about them, heard about Phil, but it's unlikely, to be honest. Rumors are spreading, and Phil wouldn't be surprised if it's becoming more well-known that Phil is searching for the kids to take under his wing. It'll be harder to search in that case. His description will be everywhere, and it'll be easy to spot out because a man with wings isn't a common sight. Wings aren't a common sight, and usually it makes Phil stand out just in general. But now his wings will be a main factor in him getting hunted down. He wonders if there's any stories drifting around for Phil and what he's doing. He's a bit curious, he'll admit. He wonders what the world thinks of an avian searching for monsters that will cause the apocalypse, just so he can take them in as his children. Do people regard him with fear? Will it warp the thoughts of most travelers? Will that look of awe now be only wary, simply because of the stories that will travel far and wide? Phil won't miss it much. If protecting Wilbur and Techno means that he will be seen in fear, then he will take it with open arms. Maybe fear surrounding his image is a good thing. It might ward off hunters more easily. Phil doesn't sleep for the 3 days of travel. Instead, he stays awake, looking up at the stars, holding Wilbur and Techno close as they rest against his chest, under his wings. The necklace tucked under his shirt, glows brighter and brighter with each night he misses out on sleep. But he ignores it. He can go a long while without any rest, as long as he isn't hurt in any sort of drastic way. He hasn't slept in about 5 days, and he can feel whispers of fatigue on his shoulders, getting whisked away by the magic that flows in his veins. He can't sleep. Not exactly because of paranoia, that is part of it. The idea of a group of hunters surrounding them in their sleep, taking Wilbur and Techno from his arms while he's helpless. He can't sleep because he's more focused on keeping watch, keeping an eye on the kids in his arms. Wilbur sleeps fitfully, every now and then kicking his legs in a way that shows he's been pulled into a nightmare. Phil's always there the moment it starts, and he always simmers it down by humming quietly and running his hand through Wilbur's hair. Wilbur always drifts off more peacefully after that. Techno sleeps like a rock, but it's the matter of actually getting him to sleep that is the problem. Sometimes it's easy. He'll knock out without a second thought, Wilbur's hand in his as he sleeps with his head tucked into Phil's shoulder. But sometimes it's harder than that. Sometimes Techno stays awake, stays wary, and Phil has to assure him again and again that everything is all right. His voice always works like a charm, and Technoblade sleeps easily, with Phil's words gently spoken over his head. Phil stays awake. He doesn't rest, except when it's to rest with his boys, to hold them underneath his wings and to calm them down so they can sleep easily. It's a bit reckless, maybe even stupid. But Phil can't help it. He can't help but ignore his own rest in favor of making sure Techno and Wilbur feel safe. The three of them follow a long dirt road for about 3 days, the road sometimes becoming hard to follow, and sometimes being very obvious against the green grass. Wilbur and Techno chat about everything. Anything. They ask questions. They press and poke at Phil for entertainment. And Phil's fond of them both, but they really are such little shits. And they know it. Is sand good food? Wilbur asks, as they're walking, his hand in Techno's, and Techno's hand in Phil's. Debate. Maybe? Techno answers hesitantly, shrugging a shoulder. Please don't tell me you've eaten sand. Phil sighs, Wilbur grinning wide with a little laugh. I've eaten gravel, Techno tells Phil, turning his head up to him, and Phil looks at him with an incredulous face, having to stop in his walking for a moment. You've what? Phil exclaims, Techno making a face like he regrets admitting that so openly. When? It was just road gravel. I thought it'd be crunchy. Was it? Wilbur asks, as Phil mentally tells himself to not look away from Techno or Will when they're near sediment, because no, you're not supposed to eat rocks. I don't care if your teeth are sharp, Wilbur, that's not edible. 3 days into travel, after plenty of foolish questions and annoying Phil to no end, they come across a town. It's surrounded mostly by a forest of trees, but there's a grassy plain far off by the end of the town. Empty land, with a bunch of what looks to be tree stumps. That area must have been a forest as well, once, but it was cut down. Not recently, with the grass being as green as it is, but it was cut a long time ago. The stumps stop by a hill that's far off in the distance, with the trees looking more abundant. Nothing is visible past those leaves, and while Phil can see the barest hint of a stone path leading up the hill, he can't see if there's any sort of building far off. Phil marks the place down as a possible place to run to if anything goes sideways in the town. All right, it doesn't seem like there's a church here, Phil murmurs as he leads Wilbur and Techno by the edge of the town, not yet approaching, but still being able to see the people walking around through the streets. But that doesn't mean we can't find someone who can help. What if we find a sorcerer? Wilbur asks, tugging at the beanie over his head. His scales are quite visible on his face, but with his fins tucked away under the hat, it's less likely that he'll be pointed out. They could know something, right? What about a wizard? Techno adds, leaning into Phil's side, pulling at his hand. That's the same thing. Wilbur leans forward to look past Phil so he can give Techno an unimpressed face. Techno holds a hand up to his chin, thinking for a moment on what he knows. He's never been one to really be that interested in magic. Everything he's ever read about it was either too little or too complicated. It's hard to get much information about any type of enchantments or spells, especially since most of it has withered away with time. No, they're actually kinda different. A sorcerer is born with magic and a wizard gets it from books. They both do magic, Wilbur snaps. Not the same magic, Techno responds, his tone dragging on like he knows he's the one with more knowledge here. Wilbur makes a face, scrunching his nose at Techno. Phil sighs fondly. Either way, they should be able to help us, if we can find one. He looks down to Techno. Pull your hood up, Tech. Wilbur? I'm hidden. All right, then. Phil grimaces, knowing there's no good way to hide the wings on his back. He folds them back tightly, holding them close to his back and keeping them as small as he can. Let's just go and see. They walk down the path and towards the town, Phil holding both Techno and Wilbur's hand, feeling their grips go tighter as they approach the buildings. They're nervous, and that's understandable. Phil hopes that one day there will be a time where they can walk through the streets of a bustling town without fear in their chests. The streets are full of people, not so much as to where it's hard to walk around, but enough to where it's loud with the chattering of passing conversations. Shop owners yelling from their front doors to come in for a good sale. Phil resists the urge to hide Techno and Wilbur underneath his feathers, and he instead just pulls them along through the streets, scanning the buildings for anyone that could be useful in their search. It's just a lot of shops, homes. There's an inn that was bigger than the last one they were at, and Phil reminds himself to get a room there later on, if everything goes well. Having a door that locks might compel him to finally sleep along with Techno and Wilbur. They walk for a bit, and there's still glances thrown their way, curious eyes. But they don't linger. Techno's face and hair is hidden, and Wilbur is cleaned up with his fins put away. It's a bit harder to really recognize them. And while Phil's wings are still out in the open, they're not noticeable right away with how tightly held they are to his back. Phil. Wilbur speaks up, after a while of pacing around through the streets. Look, that seems different. He points to what looks to be a dark purple tent, set up in a narrow alleyway between two shops. Everyone passing seems to ignore it with ease, and even Phil nearly looks past it, his eyes jumping from the store on the left to the store on the right, before he tells himself to focus, and he sees the little tent. There's a sign hung up at the entrance, saying, "Free future tellings, only 5 gold coins." It's written in a bold red that seems to shout at Phil to come in and see if it's true. That looks like a scam, mate, Phil says gently, Wilbur blinking up at him with his finger still pointed towards the tent. For a second, Phil's hit with the very real problem of Wilbur not knowing how to read. Magic is magic. Techno shrugs, reading the sign as well. Maybe they can still tell us something. Phil hums, and he decides that going over there is better than just wandering around aimlessly. He could ask for directions from a local town person, but this is also an option. And Wilbur and Techno are staring at the tent curiously now. With a quiet sigh, Phil gently pulls them along. All right, come on then. They make their way through the passing crowd of people and get to the small tent. Phil pushing open the flap to let Techno and Wilbur walk in first, then him. The first thing he notices, right off the bat, is how it seems much bigger on the inside. Even though the tent was placed in a small, narrow alleyway, the inside feels like a small but decent room. A dark red rug with gold designs on the ground. There's wooden chairs to the side, seemingly somewhere for customers to wait, and there's a few lanterns hanging from the roof tent, which seems to have gotten taller when Phil walked in. Whoa. Wilbur breathes out, looking around with wide eyes, scanning the walls and rug underneath with wonder. It smells funny, Techno points out, scrunching his nose as he takes a whiff of the air. Phil breathes in, smelling what he thinks might be chalk. Strange. Hello? Phil asks, looking around, seeing that there's yet another tent entrance across from him, the edges of the cloth lined with gold. Anyone here? There's the crash of something on the other side, and Wilbur jolts, pressing himself to Phil's leg. Techno just squints warily, squeezing Phil's hand. Oh, give me a moment. Someone calls out. Another crash sounding out, joined with a shattering of glass, and a squawk of a chicken. Wilbur makes a confused noise. The cloth is pushed to the side, a thin, pale woman coming into the room. Her skin looks unusually white, and she looks like she's just bones. Starved, perhaps. She's wearing a flowy black skirt that reaches down to the floor, with designs of constellations on the fabric, with a matching sleeveless top that shows off her intricate tattoos on her shoulders. The hat on her head is flat, with a veil attached around the ends, hiding her face behind a thin, see-through white. Phil can barely make out the shine of red earrings. There's multiple necklaces around her neck, jingling bracelets on her thin wrists, and rings on all 10 fingers, shiny and metallic. Hello, hello! I have been expecting you. She greets, waving her arms up as she stands by the tent doorway. She takes a look at Phil, and then pauses, the smile in her face dropping into pure surprise. And she then drops her gaze to Wilbur and Techno, looking back and forth between them multiple times that it's almost amusing. Oh, maybe I wasn't expecting you. Wilbur and Techno's faces go from curious about their surroundings to just suspicious, and they both lean into Phil, eyes narrowing up at the lady. Good afternoon, Phil greets, waving a hand up, and he looks down at Techno to see him holding onto Phil's shirt with a tight grip, staring at the lady with distaste. What an honor! To have you 3 walk into my tent, well, I didn't see this coming. Or did I? Now you don't know. She grins, her voice chipper and mischievous. She steps forwards towards Phil, kneeling down and making a dramatic bow, her jewelry jingling as she leans forward. Techno and Wilbur both jolt back. It is a great pleasure to have you in my presence, the oh-so-fearsome Technoblade, and... She lifts her head, seeming to think over something. The very charming Wilbur. How do you know my name? Wilbur asks, Phil thinking the same thing. I'm a witch, kid. I know a lot of things. She deadpans, and she rises to her feet, humming and stepping to the side. And you, she says to Phil. What an honor. What a delight. Is there? There is. You're an avian. Phil shifts his wings behind him, Techno tilting his head as he seems to judge the woman very openly. I'm Phil. He introduces himself. Oh, I know. Or did I? She snickers. You may call me Maria. Or Ree, if you want. That's a common nickname I have. That and goddamn witch. She sighs, holding her hands together to her chest. Well, I can assume what brings you here. Probably not a future reading. Or maybe in a way, yes. I don't usually get many customers, you know. hence the emptiness of the waiting room. She waves her arms around as to show it, then turns around with a twirl of her skirt and walks back through the cloth to the other room in the tent. Phil, you, this way. The kids ought to stay in there. She pauses, glances back. This is adults' business. The cloth closes shut behind her. She's weird, Wilbur mutters, Phil grinning. Will, Phil says gently, shaking his head. It seems like she could help. Why don't you two go sit over there, all right? Yell if you need me. I'll see if she can help us. He pushes them towards the old wooden chairs to the side, Techno and Wilbur resisting a bit against his nudging, but they go along begrudgingly anyway. The chairs creak when they sit on them, and Wilbur makes a face, leaning in towards Techno and holding onto his arm. Techno just seems bored. Phil follows after the lady into the next room, moving the tent flaps out of the way and stepping into a dimly lit room. There's a circular table at the center, with a burning lantern in the middle of it. Small plants and gems are scattered over the tablecloth, and Phil looks around the rest of the room, finding bookshelves and chests. There's small gems hanging from the ceiling, and they seem to glow faintly. Go on, sit down, Ree says, flipping through a book, standing to the side in the dimness of the room. No need to be wary here. I'm not fond of hunters either. Phil tilts his head, raising his eyebrows, but listening, stepping forward to take a seat at the table. Ree doesn't turn to look at him, but she speaks up again. Never did I think I would see the day. An avian, in my tent, seeking my help. She shuts the book closed, putting it on the shelf, turning her head to Phil. How do most usually react to your presence? Most are usually just excited to see the wings. Phil shrugs, leaning his elbows onto the table. He keeps a vigilant awareness of the knife that's strapped to his thigh and the sword on his hip. Yes, most are naive, unknowing, she says, walking over. Only a select few would know, would remember. We're not speaking of that, Phil says sharply, his tone serious. Ree just sits down in a seat across Phil with a sad smile. Can you help me or not? He asks, a bit kinder this time. With the last child, Ree whispers, leaning her elbows onto the table, the lantern lighting up her face through the thin veil. 3 monsters of the apocalypse, huh? Not my first pick to adopt, but whatever floats your boat. They're just kids, Phil corrects, wings shifting behind him. Oh, they're more than just kids, the lady hums, fiddling with a ring on her finger. Those children may not exactly have to destroy the world, but you should know that they very well have the capability of doing so. They're young now, so they're weak now. But when they grow older... She lifts her hands up, sighing. The possibilities. Phil takes a deep breath in, smelling chalk through the air, and he lets it out slowly. I just want to find the last kid. Do you know where they are? If they've been born? The lady tilts her head side to side, seeming to consider. He's been born. Still just a baby right now. Phil sits up straight in his chair, eyes wide. Another boy? A baby boy, his mind thinks, and he burns with a sense of protectiveness. However, even with such an esteemed guest as yourself and those little ones in the waiting room, I don't offer my services for free. You'll need to pay up. Phil throws a small bag onto the table, the clink of coins sounding out. That's 40 gold, he tells. Ooh. She blinks, raising her eyes up to Phil with a grin. Quick one. All right then. You're clearly desperate, and I need to pay for food. She takes the bag, pouring out the coins and counting them out as she speaks. He's not near here. He was born about a year ago, in the middle of an earthquake shaking the town. The brat looks like you. Blonde hair, blue eyes. Who knows? Maybe that's your actual kid. I don't have kids of my own blood. Phil shakes his head. Ree frowning. Where is he? In a town up in the mountaintops. You know, people like me have heard about your efforts. There's whispers about you, Phil. She says her words in almost a singing manner, the coins clinking under her fingertips. Do you know where he is, specifically? Ree looks up, smiling. A town named Summercross. It's a long way from here. The mountain is quietly protected, and if you go there, you'll find that the kid is in good hands. People like me watch over him. Keep hunters away. She says quietly, and Phil curls his hands into tight fists. But they don't mean to raise him. Like I said, there's been whispers. There's connections around the lands, and they wait for you to pick him up. Phil's grip loosens, and he lets out a silent sigh. When word traveled that a man with wings was going around, and taking in monsters of the apocalypse as his children, well, seemed like a crazy tale. Ree drops a coin, letting it clatter loudly onto the table. But you do have a good heart. And I think someone who's so strange, so unusual, is the perfect candidate to take care of the children who will be something more than anything that's ever been seen. Thank you, Phil says, voice quiet. For the help, and, well. Ree looks up, pursing her lips as she stares at Phil for an unusually long moment. Now, I have a question. Phil tilts his head. Ree smiles. Have you ever heard of the Angel of Death? Time stops for a moment, and Phil doesn't move, doesn't breathe. The air is filled with a tense silence, and Ree looks on in curiosity, eyes narrowed. Phil stands up abruptly, the chair screeching back. I'm done here. What? No, wait, we can keep talking. Ree stumbles to her feet, following Phil as he walks out swiftly into the waiting room, where Wilbur and Techno raise their heads in interest. I didn't know that's a sore spot. We can gloss over it. Hold on, I'll give you a refund. Phil stops and turns around, leaning in as she freezes. I'm done talking. He turns to Techno and Wilbur. Boys, come on, he says, more gently. They scramble to get up from their chairs, quickly taking their spot beside Phil's side, holding onto his hands. They take one look at Phil's unhappy expression, and the woman who seems panicked, and then give matching glares. They're tiny glares, but still very hatred-filled. I don't like you, Wilbur declares at the witch, and Phil huffs, amused. Will. Phil tugs them towards the entrance, looking to leave. Come on, let's go. Wait! One last thing, please. Ree holds her hands up, not following, but taking a sigh of relief when Phil stops. There's a hill, far off, past the cut-down trees. The townspeople don't go there since it's rumored to be protected by something unusual. It's safe for people like you, if you fall into trouble. Phil looks behind him. Thank you, he says, and he leaves right after. Ree standing there, 40 gold coins richer, and 1,000,000 more questions in her head. Phil goes to get a room in the inn after that. Finally, he knows where the last one is. He knows the town name, the location, and the information that the kid is being quietly protected as he's far away. It takes off a bit of worry from his shoulders, and he smiles. Wilbur and Techno are upset, though, especially with how Phil had walked out. I didn't like her, Wilbur states again, tilting his chin up as Phil laughs. Mate. Phil drags out his voice, touched at how offended they are on his behalf. Did she even tell you anything? Techno asks, tugging at Phil's hand as they make their way down the street to the inn that Phil saw earlier. What did she say? She told me where the last kid is, and that he's a baby boy who's living up in the mountains. Phil tells, and both their expressions perk up at that. A child, Wilbur points out. You're a child, Will. A smaller child, Wilbur hums. When do we meet him? Well, Phil shrugs, finally spotting the inn at the end of the road. The town is far, and I sort of recognize the town name she gave me. It'll take a while to get there, but at least we know he's safe, Yeah. Techno breathes out. That's good. It is. Phil buys a room without any problems. He doesn't go in to check it out right away, and instead takes Wilbur and Technoblade to grab a quick bite for lunch. They end up having steak with cooked mushrooms, and while the kids poke at the mushrooms with a face, they love the steak. The town seems safe for the most part. No one's given Phil a strange look, and he keeps his wings held tightly closed, so tightly held that most overlook it. And at first glance, it seems like there's just a backpack on his shoulders. They spend the rest of the day in the room Phil bought, and it's much bigger than the last one they were at. There's a comfortable bed at the center of the wall, with a window to the side, letting in sunlight, and empty drawers in the corner. There's a nightstand beside the bed, with a lamp that fascinates Wilbur, and he loves the click of the lamp when he pulls it to turn it on. Phil goes to sleep that night, with a locked door and the window curtains shut tight. Wilbur and Techno lie against him, held underneath his wings as they sleep, and Phil stays awake for a moment longer that night, feeling the time drag on. The necklace under his shirt glows, brighter than usual, and he sighs. He holds his sons closer, and chooses to finally close his eyes, letting himself drift off late in the night. He wakes up not soon after. The window is wide open, wind blowing through, the curtains waving up as they're blown to the side. He didn't leave it open, he shut it tightly closed. There's the creak of the floorboards behind him, and Phil's heart stops, sleep escaping him. There's someone in the room. He immediately pushes Wilbur and Techno off the bed, hearing them scream as they're rudely awakened, hitting the floor. When he rolls over, he's met with a stranger beside him, jabbing a knife down, and Phil doesn't move fast enough to stop it. Yelling in surprise and in pain, Phil kicks the intruder backwards, watching them stumble back. Phil's been stabbed in the side, but it's hardly a concern as he yanks out the knife and rolls off the bed, jumping at the attacker. There's more yelling, scuffling, and when Techno and Wilbur are on their feet, panicked and scared, Phil's already killed the man. And he gets up, holding a hand to his side. Dad? Techno yells, Wilbur gasping at the wound on his side. We need to go. Get your shoes. Techno, your sword. Phil rushes, and they move with a quick panic. There's not even enough time for the two of them to tug on their shoes, though, because there's slamming at the door. We know you're there, someone yells. Come out now. Phil does. He swings the door open, then promptly punches whoever's on the other side before they can even blink. There's a crowd outside in the street ready to meet them, and Phil takes Techno and Wilbur and holds them close. Kills anyone that gets too close to them. Wilbur screams out with his voice echoing into the night, and at one point, Phil's not fast enough to protect Technoblade. Techno instead killing a hunter himself. Phil picks them off, creates a path, and Wilbur and Techno fend off anyone who tries to grab them, Wilbur charming them to stay still, and Techno using his own sword to cut their throat. A net gets thrown more than once, trying to weigh them down, and Phil pulls it away, cuts them away, throws them to the side, then kills whoever had thrown it. There's people standing beside the buildings as they run through the streets, and they scream to not let Phil reach the forest, to not reach the hill. Phil ignores their yelling, and tears out someone's throat with his nails when they grab onto Technoblade. His hands and clothes are dirty, and they're all a mess. And when, finally, Phil has just enough space to breathe, he grabs Technoblade and Wilbur and takes off into the air, narrowly avoiding the arrows that follow. Wilbur screams over his shoulder as they leave, and Techno laughs. Out of panic, out of the relief of getting far, who knows? Phil just flies. He collapses at the tree line of the hill he had seen before. Everything's heavy, and Phil's sharply reminded of the deep wound in his side as he takes Techno and Wilbur by the hands and pulls them along to run into the trees. They run, and Phil hopes that what the witch from before said was true, that this hill is safe, because he knows the people will follow. And when he falls to the ground in exhaustion, just a few minutes in, he's not at all surprised. "Phil!" Techno yells, immediately trying to pull him up. "Get up, we need to go!" Wait! Wilbur chokes out, and he coughs, waving a hand to Techno. Phil? Phil takes a second to just lay back on the dirt, gasping in the night air and trying to calm his heart. They're somewhat safe right now, but they need to keep moving. Techno and Wilbur have fallen to the ground with him, and Wilbur's grabbing him by the face, nearly shaking him. "Don't die. Do not die." I'm all right. Phil huffs with a grin, sighing heavily as he tries to sit up. "No, you're not. Sit back down." Wilbur yells, voice cracking midway through, raspy and rough. And he tries to push Phil onto the ground. "Technoblade?" "You're gonna bleed out," Techno says quietly. And Phil feels something get pressed to his side. And when he looks down, he finds Techno's taken off his hood, using it to try and lessen the bleeding from Phil's wound. "Press harder, he's gonna die!" Wilbur snaps, then coughs terribly, holding at his throat. "Stop talking, we might need your voice." Techno snaps back, and he leans more against Phil's side. No. Phil lays back, blinking his eyes hard to try and push away the feeling of exhaustion that's creeping up. He's pushed it for too long, he knows. He's going to pass out, whether he likes it or not. The necklace around his neck can only do so much, and it needs energy to heal, which means Phil needs to be rested, which is a problem, since he hasn't slept in a week. He reaches his hands up, holding onto Wilbur's face and forcing him to look at him. "Wilbur, look at me. You too, Techno?" Techno's near tears, and Wilbur is already crying, grabbing at Phil's hands with a death grip. "I'm going to be fine. I won't die. Look. Without a sliver of hesitation, Phil pulls the necklace out from underneath his shirt, and it glows a bright, bright red in his hand. "See this?" "What?" Wilbur trails off, barely a whisper, and Techno's blinking at him in confusion. "It's enchanted, okay? I won't die. It heals me. It keeps me safe, but it needs energy in order to heal me. I haven't been sleeping too much lately, so it's slow, but I'll be all right." "Magic!" Techno blurts out, Phil feeling his vision swim for a moment. "Phil? Dad?" "I'm okay," Phil huffs. "I'm fine. I'm gonna be just fine. I won't die. I promise." He holds a palm to Wilbur's face and reaches a hand out to Techno. "Here, Techno, come here." "No, you're still bleeding." "It'll heal, mate. With time, I'm all right." You need to sleep to heal faster, right? Wilbur leans down, whispering low, close to Phil. It would go faster if I rested, yes. But I'll be fine either way. Hurts like a bitch, but I'm alright. Phil grins. Look. Technoblade, look at the cut on my hand. He holds up his palm towards Techno, and Technoblade lifts his head to find it looking better than before. Not completely healed, but the skin is pink and more put together. It looks more like a bad scratch, rather than an attempt at stopping a knife. Some of the tension from Techno's shoulders lets go once he realizes that Phil really is healing just fine. You can't stay hurt, Techno realizes out loud. That's good. I'm going to be okay. Phil promises. He turns to Wilbur. Will, do me a favor. Help me up. You should rest. Wilbur whispers, Phil grinning. When we're more inside the forest and safe, then I'll take a nap, okay? But I need to get up. No. You. Wilbur hesitates, looking at Techno, who looks back with something Phil can't pick apart. Maybe it's because his vision is going blurry again, and he blinks hard again, trying to stay awake. You should sleep. We can keep watch. Will. Phil insists. I'm all right. I can get up, just help me a bit. Dad. Wilbur breathes out, holding onto Phil's hand that's pressed against his face. Phil's heart squeezes, and he smiles. Go to sleep. He goes into a coughing fit right after. Phil freezes, eyes going wide for a second, and then they close, his entire body going limp. Is he asleep? Techno asks, Wilbur nodding and carefully putting Phil's hand down. Okay. Okay then, do we wait now? Wilbur nods again, rubbing at his throat. It's sore, and it hurts, but he hopes that he can use it if they have to. Should we? Wilbur whispers, turning to Technoblade, and they both freeze at the sound of rustling nearby. There's voices, getting closer, yelling. Okay, quick, help me move him. Techno jumps to his feet, Wilbur following, and they take Phil by the arms, pulling him across the ground to try and make distance. The necklace around his neck glows bright, humming. Phil continues to breathe, healing by the minute, and Techno hopes that Phil will be all right, like he said. Wilbur can make out the voices of hunters coming nearby, yelling, "This way! They went this way!" And his heart slams in his chest, hands trembling as he pulls at Phil. It'll be painful to overuse his voice, but it'll be necessary if the hunters find them. The yelling gets nearer and nearer, and Wilbur hears an, "I see them!" His throat feels dry with fear, and Techno gives up on moving Phil, taking out his sword and standing in front of him. Wilbur drops to the ground, breathing heavy and draping himself over Phil, ready to try and be some sort of shield. The sound of approaching footsteps stop. There's a rumbling voice that lifts into the air, Techno and Wilbur sharing a scared glance.
Hunters aren't allowed in this forest,
something says, and Wilbur swallows, feeling his throat burn. There's screaming, and the sound of footsteps going away. Two sets of footsteps still go towards them. Techno raises his sword with a snarl, and Wilbur presses himself closer to Phil, nearly hyperventilating at this point, scared and panicking, and his mouth opens and closes, ready to scream out a command. A tall demon comes out from the trees, large horns on his head, and the sight of him makes Wilbur blink in shock, his mind going blank. Techno seems thrown off too, and he just stares, eyes wide. Oh my goodness, Bad says, holding his hands to his mouth. Skeppy, these are kids. What? Another person pushes past, much shorter than the first one. And Wilbur realizes that his skin twinkles, as if diamonds had been embedded into it, into his face. What? Wait. Their eyes fall onto the person Techno and Wilbur are protecting, and Techno lets out another snarl. A clear warning. Wilbur bares his teeth and presses himself to Phil's chest. Holy shit. Skeppy swears, eyes wide. Bad doesn't reprimand him for the language because he's in shock too. Are those wings? Bad breathes out, feeling short of breath from the sight. 2 kids, hybrid kids by the looks of it, trying to protect. This shouldn't be possible. Bad knows this. He knows a lot. He's been around a long time. And he has old books talking about old stories from long, long ago. This, in front of him, shouldn't be possible. Phil's right there, sleeping and healing slowly, with a necklace that hums obviously with magic. A complicated enchantment. But he shouldn't be here at all. There hasn't been a single winged folk, a single avian seen in hundreds of years. They were all killed off, centuries ago.